It began with flashing red and blue lights in the rearview mirror, a sound that makes anyone's heart skip. But for him, that night, it meant something far more dangerous. An elderly black man, driving home on a quiet road, slowed his car to the side, unaware that the next few minutes would test not just his patience, but his dignity, his safety, and his very place in a country he had served for decades. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't breaking the law. Yet still, the officer's gaze locked onto him like a target. What happened on that roadside was not just another traffic stop. It was a chilling reminder of how quickly respect can be stripped away when skin color becomes the first judgment. But what the officer didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was who this man really was. And when the truth came to light, the silence that followed would echo far beyond that lonely highway. Before we dive into this suspenseful story, please drop a comment with your city so we can see how far it reaches. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. His name was Harold Jennings, a man whose presence carried both quiet wisdom and unshakable authority. At 72, his life had been marked not by scandal or disgrace, but by years of hard work, resilience, and service to justice. He had risen from humble beginnings in a small southern town, where his parents had fought tooth and nail for every scrap of opportunity, to the highest bench in the land. To most, Harold was simply another elderly man, with silver hair and a calm voice. But behind that gentle demeanor stood a Supreme Court judge, one of the most respected legal minds of his time. His days were filled with stacks of case files, long hours of deliberation, and the immense responsibility of shaping decisions that would ripple across the nation. Yet outside the courtroom, he was simply Harold, a husband, a grandfather, a man who enjoyed late-night jazz records and evening drives to clear his head. That night had been no different. After attending a dinner with colleagues, Harold took the long route home, preferring the quiet stretch of road over the crowded city streets. His mind wandered, as it often did, reflecting on the countless battles fought in courtrooms, the speeches about equality he had heard throughout his career, and the slow, painful progress toward a fairer society. To him, these drives were moments of peace, reminders of how far he had come from the dirt roads of his childhood. But peace, as he was about to learn, is fragile, especially when it rests on the thin line of perception. Because in that moment, Harold wasn't seen as a judge. He wasn't seen as a man who had dedicated his life to the law. He wasn't seen as a grandfather heading home. All the officer saw was the color of his skin and the car he drove. And, as the headlights drew closer in his rearview mirror, Harold had no idea that the ordinary drive he cherished so much was about to turn into an encounter that would strip away all titles, all accomplishments, and reduce him, in the officer's eyes, to nothing more than a suspect. The flashing blue and red lights appeared suddenly in Harold's rearview mirror, shattering the calm of his drive. At first, he thought little of it. Traffic stops happen all the time. But as the siren wailed and the patrol car signaled him to pull over, a knot formed in his stomach. He eased his car to the side of the empty road, his hands steady on the wheel, his face calm but cautious. For decades, he had seen countless cases rooted in these exact moments, and he knew too well how quickly they could spiral out of control. The officer approached slowly, boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, flashlight beams slicing through the night. Harold rolled down his window, ready to offer his license and registration, but the man didn't ask for them. Instead, his eyes narrowed, scanning Harold's car, then Harold himself, as though he were already guilty of something unspoken. The questions weren't polite requests. They were accusations disguised as inquiries. Why was he driving this kind of car at night? Where was he headed? Did he really live in that neighborhood he claimed? Each word dripped with suspicion. Each pause heavy with unspoken. Harold kept his tone measured, his movements deliberate, remembering the countless stories of stops gone wrong. He knew compliance didn't guarantee safety, but resistance could be deadly. Yet the officer wasn't satisfied. He demanded that Harold step out of the vehicle. For a man of Harold's age, climbing out into the cold night air wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. The pavement felt harder beneath his feet, and the flashing lights made his skin glow harshly against the dark. The officer's hand hovered near his holster, his stance aggressive, as if Harold's very existence posed a threat. And then came the shove. Not a gentle nudge, not a firm guiding hand, but a sharp, deliberate push that sent the elderly man stumbling toward the hood of his own car. The officer barked orders, commanding Harold to spread his arms, to place them flat against the cold metal surface. Harold's heart pounded, not from guilt, but from disbelief. After decades of interpreting the Constitution, defending justice, and shaping the law of the land, here he was, treated like a criminal for nothing more than the color of his skin. Cars passed by, slowing just enough for drivers to witness the humiliating scene. Some stared, some looked away, but no one stopped. The officer's voice grew harsher, louder, as if volume could justify aggression. Harold's mind raced. He could reveal his identity. He could end this ordeal with a single sentence. "I am Justice Harold Jennings of the Supreme Court." But something stopped him. Why should he need to announce his title, his position, his worth, in order to be treated with basic dignity? Why should respect depend on power rather than humanity? The tension escalated with every second. The officer began rifling through Harold's car without permission, tossing aside documents, pulling open compartments. Papers fluttered to the ground, scattered like pieces of his dignity. Harold stood, motionless, each muscle tensed, knowing that any sudden movement could be twisted into justification for violence. His chest ached with the weight of the moment. Not just his own humiliation, but the crushing truth that no amount of success or prestige could shield him from prejudice. And then, the moment that shifted everything, another officer arrived. Two sets of boots echoed in the night now, two pairs of eyes fixed on Harold as if he were prey surrounded by predators. The first officer gestured toward Harold's car, muttering something that made the second laugh. They weren't just enforcing the law, they were mocking him, reducing him to nothing more than a spectacle under the strobe of police lights. The scene teetered on the edge of disaster. Harold's patience was wearing thin, his body trembling with suppressed anger. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't just his battle. This was every man and woman who had been profiled, every innocent soul stopped, searched, or silenced because of the color of their skin. The question clawed at his mind. Should he reveal who he was and shatter their arrogance? Or should he endure the injustice silently, forcing them to confront the truth of their actions later? The decision loomed like a blade in the dark, and the night air grew heavier with every breath. Because Harold knew, whatever he chose next could change not just his fate, but the way this story would echo far beyond that roadside. The officer's shove grew harder, pressing Harold against the hood of his own car, his cheeks scraping the cold metal as the second officer laughed under his breath. Every nerve in Harold's body screamed with humiliation. Still, it wasn't just the pain that cut him. It was the weight of decades of service to the very justice system now mocking him in the dirt. He wasn't Harold Jennings, the man tonight. To them, he was nothing more than an old black driver they could dominate. Sabi, officer's voice rose into a bark, demanding that he put his hands higher, accusing him of resisting. Harold's heart raced. He had presided over cases where moments like these ended in tragedy, where a simple breath, a flinch, or even a heartbeat too loud became the excuse for violence. He knew that at his age, one wrong move could mean more than bruises. It could mean the end of his life. The second officer leaned closer, his smirk lit by the flashing lights. "Men like you think you belong here?" The words were venom, an open declaration that this wasn't about suspicion or law. It was about power, about stripping away dignity. For the first time in years, Harold felt a tremor of helplessness ripple through him. His hands trembled against the hood, his breath fogging the air as though the night itself was tightening around his throat. And then the sound of snapping cameras. A car had slowed, a phone raised, recording every detail. The officers froze for a fraction of a second, their arrogance briefly checked by the knowledge that eyes beyond this roadside now bore witness. But instead of backing down, the first officer's hand twitched toward his holster. This dangerous impulse sent a chill down Harold's spine. The world seemed to narrow in that instant. The siren's reflection painted the road in chaotic streaks of red and blue. Harold's chest heaved with fury and fear. He could remain silent, enduring the degradation until they released him. Or he could end it all with one sentence. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head enough to lock eyes with the officer, his voice steady but thunderous in its truth. "I am Justice Harold Jennings of the Supreme Court." The silence that followed was deafening. The officers blinked, their confidence cracking, their posture stiffening as the realization crashed down. The man they shoved, mocked, and humiliated wasn't just another target of their prejudice. He was one of the most powerful interpreters of the law in the nation. The roles had reversed in a heartbeat, their authority evaporating into thin air. But Harold didn't move from the hood of the car. He didn't stand tall or demand an apology. Instead, he let the weight of the moment hang in the air, forcing them to taste the bitter truth of what they had done. The cameras still rolled, capturing not just the arrogance of their actions, but the devastating irony of their mistake. And as the night pressed in, one chilling question remained unanswered. Would this exposure finally change anything? Or would it simply become another story buried beneath headlines, another reminder that justice, even when standing before them, could still be shoved to the ground? For a long, unbroken moment, silence ruled that roadside. The officers shifted uneasily, their bravado stripped away as the weight of Harold's name settled over them. A Supreme Court judge, the man they had manhandled, mocked, and nearly escalated. Violence against was a symbol of justice itself. Yet even as the realization dawned on them, Harold remained against the hood, breathing slowly, refusing to rise until he was ready. It wasn't weakness, it was power, the kind that comes from restraint, from refusing to let rage dictate the next move. When they finally stepped back, their apologies stumbled over each other, awkward, hollow, drenched in fear rather than remorse. Harold straightened, every motion deliberate, every breath heavy with years of watching men like these play games with lives they thought disposable. He looked at them not as a victim, nor even as their superior, but as a man who had carried the burden of knowing that the very system he represented was still poisoned by prejudice. Cameras kept recording, and headlights from passing cars washed over the scene. Though the officers scrambled to regain control, the moment had already slipped from their grasp. Harold returned to his vehicle, his hands steady on the wheel, his face calm, but his spirit burning. Driving away, he understood this night was not about his title, his robe, or even his legacy. It was about every black man and woman who would not have the shield of power to reveal at the final second. It was about those who were silenced, those who never got to stand back up after being shoved down. He knew that while he might drive home alive, countless others had not. And that truth seared into him far deeper than the sting on his cheek. The incident quickly spread, and the video was shared online, sparking outrage, debates, and demands for accountability. To the public, it was a shocking revelation. A Supreme Court justice treated with the same contempt that countless ordinary citizens endured daily. For Harold, it was not revelation, but confirmation. It proved what he already knew, that racism did not pause for status, education, or achievement, that no robe, no title, no courtroom could insulate a black body from the suspicion and violence ingrained into the system. In the quiet of his home, Harold reflected on the irony. His life had been dedicated to interpreting the Constitution, to defending rights that were still, even now, denied to him on the side of a dark highway. It wasn't his first brush with racism, and it would not be the last. But this one carried a cruel symbolism. Suppose a man like him could be shoved, humiliated, and nearly endangered by the very people sworn to uphold the law. What chance did the unseen, unheard millions have? The world would move on quickly, as it often did, the news cycles swallowing one outrage with the next. But Harold carried the scars of that night differently. They weren't visible, yet they were etched into his being, a reminder that justice in America still depended too much on luck, timing, and titles. He understood, painfully and personally, that his survival had hinged on a name, and not everyone had one powerful enough to save them. And so, the question lingers, echoing far beyond that roadside confrontation. How many more names must be whispered in fear, shouted in protest, or carved into headlines before change truly arrives? How many more lives must be caught between flashing lights and prejudice before the promise of equality becomes more than words on paper? Perhaps the cameras saved Harold that night, but who will save the ones no cameras catch?